Okay. So anyway, Tomer, welcome. It's going to be interesting to talk to you today. Where are you calling in from, by the way?
Sorry?
Where are you currently located?
I'm in Israel.
Okay. All right.
Haifa.
So if you don't mind, can you give us a little bit of your background so people know a little bit about your story?
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to speak to all of you. And Sean, I'm a long-time fan of you, and I really appreciate your work. So thank you for everything you do.
Well, welcome. I mean, and like I said, it's just good to have more people that are seeing benefits, and so glad you're here to share your story. So.
Yeah, and it has been very helpful for me in my personal journey. So thank you for that. So as a kid, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And as a child, I struggled very much with following the Western diet method. And fast forward to my early adulthood, I moved to the big city and then enjoyed the nightlife a bit too much. My own health was way out of my radar at the time, and eventually it caught up to me and I felt really lost. I decided that from that low point, I will dig much more into the science of diabetes and metabolic problems. And by that, I started going much more to the library and much less to the nightclubs. And I started to realize how food has such a huge effect on my health and my well-being. I was reading more and more about low-carb diets and everything around that. And I knew that there's something that could give me back the control that I never had over my health and my body and my mind. From that low point, I decided to always help those who were in the same point as me, the same very low point. I can't say health point because I was healthy. It's not that I was unhealthy, but I devoted much more of my time to improve. That's the word. My health and the health of the people surround me. And of course, I stopped going to the nightclubs and started changing my nutrition and health. And I deeply questioned the Western medical way of healing, which ultimately brought me to make this drastic change in my life. And today I'm a certified personal trainer, nutrition science student, and I'm studying to become a clinical nutritionist in the Hebrew University in Israel, in Jerusalem. And I'm very much helping those who surround me with having the same metabolic issues, especially I'm treating those with type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, and hormone imbalance of any kind. And yeah, that's what I do today. So I'm doing that so other people can achieve happier and healthier lives the same way as I regained my health, which I think it's very important for all of us. And we're doing it through low carb diet and a lot of workouts. I'm a personal trainer, so that's the main enterprise. And yeah, that's it.
As a type 1 diabetic, you have I'm sure you've checked your blood glucose thousands upon thousands of times, probably checked multiple times throughout the day. I don't know if you have continuous glucose monitor, but over the years, you've probably checked many, many times. And my assumption is you find that a low carb diet results in better glucose control and less insulin usage. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, important to mention that I wear a CGM, a continuous glucose monitor, and I know my blood glucose 24/7 around the clock, and yeah, of course, absolutely. I've been low carb 3 years now, and And yeah, I think I'm mostly at my 70s, 80s in the blood glucose. I mean, um, the highest would be 110. Sometimes occasionally 115, but yeah, that's extremely rare. So, and I also check from the finger because that's the most accurate eventually. So I do it also a lot, and yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean that's basically normal blood glucose. I mean, as a type 1 diabetic, and that's not something, and most people that maybe don't know about type 1 diabetics, it's very rare to a type 1 diabetic to have a normal glucose. I mean, it's, the average for, I think I've seen studies on that looking at the average blood glucose, and it's around 180. That's just, and that's considered pretty typical normal type 1 diabetic control. And even the endocrinologists don't really expect much more than that. And to have completely normal blood glucose, which 70s, 80s, and maxing out at 110 is clearly within that range. Are you finding, has your insulin usage gone down to achieve that, or are you're just dosing massive amounts of insulin to achieve that?
No, absolutely. I can tell you that 4 years ago I was following the standard American diet. You can say it's in Israel, but we live by the same standard, the Western standards, and my blood glucose was all over the place. I could go to 450 and I could have hypoglycemias of 30s, and it was all day long this what they call the blood glucose roller coaster, and it was completely out of control. And needless to say, I was much more tired. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't study as I do today. Today I can concentrate for like 12 hours, and back then impossible. Like I had this huge changes in energy during the day. And yeah, the sad part is that the endocrinologists they aim you to be at around 180. That's the range, and you know it probably. That's like the common range in the Western endocrinology society, and yeah, it's really sad. And they think that you as a diabetic can live in those ranges, but it's not true. You and I, we have the same biological system. We are destined to the same complications, the same yeah, the same biological environment ourselves. So so it's absurd.
So, I mean, I'm just curious, because there's been some people, I just saw a recent person discussing the concerns with, eating meat in the diet as being problematic for diabetics due to overexpression of glucagon and lack of insulin sensitivity. I mean, do you eat any meat in your diet? Are you on I mean, how does your diet look? What does your diet look like?
Um, the too much, you mean the too much meat kind of concerns, the usual concerns?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's somebody, out there talking about that if you eat animal food, too much animal protein, you're going to become insulin resistant due to the overexpression of glucagon. And my sort of thought around that is, we've seen what happens, and they also talk about fasting as well, but we've seen what happens with people that don't include carbohydrates. They become carbohydrate intolerant, but not necessarily insulin resistant. So when they, as a low carb person, you still respond to insulin. When you inject insulin, it lowers your blood glucose. I'm assuming, is that correct?
Yeah, and my insulin level it dropped like I used to have an average of 40, I think 50 units daily was my average, and today it's around 15. And still I gained much more muscle mass since I started this diet actually, and I still inject less, although I think I weigh a bit more. And yeah, that's I eat animal based. Usually, occasionally, I will add some salad, but not more than 1 cup of green vegetables. That's the like around there. It's only for like as a I don't know as a side small dish. Most of my meals can be only like red meat. A lot of red meat. It's animal based, very carnivore-ish diet.
Yeah, and and the fact that you've actually gained weight and put on muscle, that would generally, when we think about dosing diabetics, particularly for insulin, the more you weigh, the more insulin you would theoretically need. You know, it's weight based by kilogram. And if you gain weight and seen your insulin requirements come down, that would indicate increasing insulin sensitivity, not the opposite, which is being sort of talked about, you know, about that sort of issue there. So obviously diet plays a role in this, but how else do you manage your glucose? I mean, you know, you talk about exercise, and you know, exercise has differential effects on glucose, you know, depending on the intensity. So how do you manage that, and what's been your response?
Yeah, that's a good question, because exercise, it's very, also what I see in my clients, it's very changing from one person to another. And some people, I can tell you about myself that if I do cardio, so it almost always will drop my blood sugar. There will be an immediate drop, and after like 10 minutes from the beginning of the workout. And when you do the strenuous workouts more like as you do, like for high intensity for a short period, so usually there is a sharp rise in the blood glucose. And yeah, I think I can say that it's 90% diet. No, let's 80% diet, 15% the workouts, and the 5% that left, it's techniques like to know exactly the timing of insulin and the amount, I would say. And that's also considering workouts, because if I inject like 2 hours before workout, so I have a lot of active insulin in my body, and then during the workout, I will always have a fall, even if I do strenuous for short periods, strenuous exercise. So still, I will have a drop, because the cells, they take all the insulin that out there like immediately. So that's what I feel.
Yeah, it's interesting with the timing around that, because if you're going to do it, if you're, you know, because I think even people without diabetes will see if they do intense exercise, very often their glucose will go up to reach that demand, and it's a lot of it is probably liver glycogen, you know, breakdown, glycogenolysis to supply that demand. And I've seen that myself. The highest glucoses I ever see are after very acute, high intense exercise. You know, and it's not food that drives it; it's exercise in my particular situation. But I'm just wondering, so you find that, so, you know, again, there are some type 1 diabetics that are in this community that listen to this. What does your insulin regimen look like? Are you on a basal bolus type situation, MDI? Are you doing a pump, or what does that look like for you?
In the past, before this diet, I used to be on the pump, and the pump is very problematic. It can get very problematic in the long term, because you can get a tissue that will not absorb well the insulin on that spot. So I moved with that change. I moved also to the good old syringes, the old school one that you had also 100 years ago. It's this one, you know, the very, very old one, but it works best, and it's very accurate, and there's never dropping on insulin. So yeah, I work with that very well, and I do basal bolus, and I divide the basal, because when you get to these such a low insulin levels, I'm now 24 hours, I get 10 basal. Yeah, 10 basal total. So I have to divide it, because you know the manufacturers of the insulin, like Tresiba, you know, NovoRapid and all of them. Tresiba, it's a kind of insulin. So they aimed it for the standard American diet, for the people that inject enormous doses, So and by that, they claim that it will last 48 hours. But I see that in those low levels of insulin, it will last maximum for 12, maybe 15 hours. So I divided those like twice a day. I inject 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. and it works really well.
And are you using, and so the insulin you're using for your basal is a long acting insulin, a modern insulin, and what about your bolus? Is that a regular insulin, or is that one of the rapid acting insulins you use?
Yeah, so for low carb, you know, the pace of the digestion and all of the high protein. So yeah, you use a regular, you have to. Otherwise, you will chase the meal. In the beginning, when I still wasn't the NovoRapid, it's the fast acting. So I used to you inject, and then after 1 hour, there is a rise from the protein, and like that for 6 hours. And now I inject only the regular for like 30 minutes before, and it covers it completely. You only have to find the right amount. That's the place where trial and error comes to place. But when you find the right amount, so yeah, 30 minutes before the meal, it covers perfectly the protein, the high amount of meat.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is important to understand because, that traditionally, the endocrinologists teach it about carb-based dosing, and they many of them just ignore protein and certainly ignore fat. You find that what has been your experiences, with how much protein do you have to dose for? Like how many grams of protein are going to take how many units of insulin for you?
Um, I kind of stopped counting because I'm doing it automatically, but I think it would be for 30 grams of protein, I will inject half a unit, maybe even less than half, and so average meal I would eat usually a guy at my size. I think like in a US numbers it would be 1 pound, 1 pound a meal, maybe a bit less. So yeah, it's 3 units of insulin, of regular insulin. It covers perfectly now, and of course there is a lot of probably like a lot of different parameters that influence the insulin sensitivity. It can be stress. In days of high stress, you can find yourself inject 4, and in days of intense activity, if you also worked out and also walked a lot physically outside, or I don't know, so also you can inject maybe 2, maybe sometimes even 1.5, and the same with the basal. It can go down to, I had days that I used to train for the half marathon intensely, so I got down really low, like 4, around 4. I used to think that maybe my pancreas got back to do its job. I don't know. It was crazy low. So it's very, very.
Yeah, I mean, and the question is, with many type 1 diabetics, we do see some residual insulin function. There's a small amount that still remains, and the question is, and you can check with C-peptide. The problem is checking it in the context of taking exogenous insulin, which most people are doing. It's hard to tell because you get this factitious suppression of endogenous production if you have any. And so I've seen a few type 1 diabetics who've actually seen increases in C-peptide by going on, carnivore diets. And so maybe they're seeing a little bit of improvement in insulin ability. It's kind of interesting to potentially consider. When you were, this is the other thing that are you aware of Dr. Richard Bernstein? You're probably familiar with his work. I mean, I would imagine.
Yeah, of course, he's a legend. One of the most important in the diabetic world.
Yeah, and he's obviously you line up pretty well with what he talks about, and he's got a book on that. Well, let's talk a little bit about type 2 diabetes, because type 2 diabetes obviously is quite different than type 1 diabetes, more on the insulin resistance side, typically associated with, we are typically associated with obesity, but not always, but very often. How do you approach a type 2? So you said your work has been affecting other people around you. How are you approaching type 2 diabetics, and do they do anything differently, or how do with managing that?
With type 2, the same rules apply more or less. The difference is that we always we don't have the insulin side of it many times. So I have many type 2s in my work. I had a woman that she came to me. She was 52, and that's the most common scenario. You've probably seen it thousands of times, that she comes and the doctor she starts to wake up with 140 blood glucose. Then next lab work, she wakes up with 180, and so on. And then she got to me, and then the work that we've done, it's exactly the same as I do. The philosophy is the same. Everything was the same. The only thing that we didn't have the insulin. So low carb diet. The same exercise more or less as I do. I do a lot of strength sprints kind of today. Like I quit the half marathon, so that's what I do. I do a lot of strength, and I find it much better also for the diabetes and also for my own. Let's leave the numbers aside for a moment. Like for my feeling, I feel way better. I feel much much vital and strong. So that's what I've done for her. And yeah, and you know, immediately that's what happens every time, every single time. You put the person on low carb, a bit exercise, but it's not a must. And she got back to the normal level. Of course, she lost weight. So I would say it's the same. It's exactly the same. But also type 2, it's insulin resistance, but it's reversible. So
Let me ask you, I assume, you know, because you're taking insulin, you have somebody prescribing it for you, I would assume, and I mean, maybe not. And it's interesting in the U.S., and some people aren't aware, you can get insulin over the counter, which I thought was quite interesting to find out. You can go and get it actually quite cheaply. There's Walmart, you know, sells insulin for $25 a vial for sort of regular insulin, which is surprising because you know the modern insulins would cost you $400-500, $600 for the same sort of medication. Although it's ultra rapid acting and designed for carbohydrates. But does your provider, your physician, your endocrinologist, what does he say now that you're on this low carb diet and you're not using much insulin? Is he okay with that? Is he concerned you're going to have a heart attack, or what's the story there?
That's a really good question, actually. In Israel, it's the same as the US. Their perspective of the endocrinologist that 90% of them will put you on high carb and high levels of blood glucose. But actually, I got to this in the first place. I got to all of that diet through my endocrinologist. He's one of the few in Israel. He's in the north, in Rambam Hospital Center, and there is another one in Tel Aviv that I think the only one who do, they treat low carb for diabetes. That's what they do for diabetics. And yeah, so we got it. So it's good. It got me to the diet, and I'm thankful for that. But you know, they don't go all the way fully to the diet, because after, I would say, 1.5 years, now I'm already 2.5 years. So yeah, 1 year ago, so you know, my cholesterol started changing a bit, all of this stuff, and he got really nervous. So in that perspective, he didn't go all the way with that, and that was a bit disappointing. But yeah, and in Israel, about the insulin and all, you know, we're very lucky. I'm sorry for the community, the guys in your community to hear. I don't want, but we're kind of lucky that it's subsidized. You know, all the medical care here, it's from the government, and it's very, very free. Like you can get as I think anything you need, even the continuous glucose monitor is the same from the Medicare. So yeah, by that we are lucky. And yeah, I heard about Walmart and all what happened in the US. It's insane. Like the people have to pay, I don't know, $150 for a vial, and that's crazy. It's crazy. But I know the situation in the US.
When so when you know, when you talk to other people about this, what has been the response? You know, I don't know what the situation. I know in Israel, for instance, there's a fairly large vegan community. I mean, I think you know that's something that's there. Obviously, that's going to be typically a high carb approach. Do you find a lot of pushback in low carb? How well is low carb accepted in Israel?
Yeah, actually, you know, people like vegan. Yeah, Tel Aviv, it's the vegan city, like the vegan capital of the world. I know, but it's also it's very nice to know that it's comforting that there is not a small community of a low carb also, and a low carb community. There is a ketogenic diet. I believe it's 40,000 people on Facebook, Israeli ketogenic diet, and there is a group also of Bernstein, the one you mentioned earlier, Bernstein followers in Israel. It's like 15,000, and they do a tremendous work. So yeah, it's now today we're in a point that there is a real communities in Israel of low carb. But you're right that the mainstream still, of course, it's not the mainstream. It's very on the side, and yeah, in Tel Aviv it's a crazy vegan city. Like you have everywhere you have vegan burgers, vegan cafe, whatever you like. So, but yeah, but the my close environment, of course, they were against it because it's not the mainstream. And I was raised in a family that we go. My parents, they go to doctors and they listen to the doctor, and like what the doctor says, that's the truth. And I went completely against it in that sense. And in many senses now, because I had to leave also, you know, the other endocrinologist because of for the cholesterol. You know, it sounds funny, but because of that the cholesterol issue, I couldn't stay because they want to give you the statin, the pill, and yeah, that so we broke up, you can say.
Yeah, I mean, you know, when it comes to, you know, listening to the doctors, there's a lot of doctors, and many of them have different opinions and different ways of approaching things. So it's like, which doctor do you believe? You know, we've all had the same, relatively same education, but some of us come to different conclusions. And you know, I certainly have. I mean, I certainly, you know, have seen so many people improve, and the results are undeniable, I think. And I think it's something that it's good that more and more people are willing to talk about that. And the fact that we have a social media that allows us to share these results is actually quite a good thing. Um, what happens? I mean, so at this point, some people would say that, well, it's not good to eat a low carb diet because you lose your ability to handle carbohydrates. And if you want to eat them, there's people that have the exact opposite approach. You know, they approach it with, um, you know, there's a book called Mastering Diabetes written by a couple of vegans, and their approach is to eat just a tremendous amount of carbohydrates, but limit the fat to basically non-existent fat. And by that allows them to eat more carbohydrates with relatively less insulin. However, their A1C control is not as good as yours is going to be. I mean, it just basically allows you to eat more carbohydrates. Do you eat carbohydrates from time to time? Is there ever a day where you have a bunch of carbs, and what is the result of that?
Yeah, actually, I know the work of the guys in Mastering Diabetes and all. I read the work. Yeah, I think as you said, it's a nice excuse. I don't know, to eat fruits and all, but it's getting you back to the roller coaster again. So I don't know what we've done in that. Yeah, and the claim that the insulin resistance and the meat, I think it haven't been proven like very scientifically very well. And for me it was the opposite. Yeah, the insulin resistant level, I think it stayed the same as it's always been since I was diabetic like 20 years already. But the thing that really affect the resistance much more is activity level. That's all. That's what always been. And my A1C is now for 2.5 years it's below 5, always like 4.8, 4.7, 4.9, and the most important thing is that that's what Dr. Bernstein, the legendary Dr. Bernstein, that's what he discovered, that it gives you back the control over your blood glucose, and by that, of course, over your life.
You know, type 1 diabetes generally carries a longevity detriment of about 10 years. You know, most diabetics, you know, 65 is a life expectancy in the US for a type 1 diabetic. Um, and that's secondary to these complications that occur probably due to hyperglycemia or unstable blood glucose. Um, Eyesight, kidney function, you know, cardiovascular disease. Have you been monitoring those things? And if so, have you seen any differences with the change in diet, or have you seen any problems related to, you know, the diabetes at this point?
Yeah, actually, you know what? Actually, I've been monitoring quite close, also in my high carb diet days, and also in the low carb, and I can compare quite well. If you if you want to see the results, it's quite a good. It's like a lab in my life. So so yeah, I would say the kidney function got better with my EGFR, but slightly better. But anything else, you know, especially what you would look at metabolic status, such as also like the HDL triglycerides and all the lipid profile got way better. But there is a small issue with type 1, that it's autoimmune, and you probably know it, that sometimes if the cholesterol numbers, they get really sky high, especially after you go to a low carb, so it can indicate on some other autoimmune issues, such as Hashimoto, you know, the hypothyroid disease that is autoimmune. The body attack the thyroid. So yeah, so that's what I also discovered with my in my own my own research. I discovered it on myself, and I had to treat it myself because most of the endocrinologists they would tell you also that it's not exist. Also, although in the science it's very famous. Like you have a lot of research about type 1 that it's inherited with Hashimoto or many times with a celiac. I don't have celiac, but many people they have type 1 and celiac or type 1 and Crohn disease. So that's I think that's an important piece in the cholesterol puzzle sometimes that people don't usually talk about.
Yeah, there is definitely an undeniable relationship with diabetes and thyroid function. I mean, that's been clearly demonstrated, you know, that it can be an issue. There's certainly a high association. Let me ask you, I mean, I've heard people, you know, type 1 diabetics talking about going on either carnivore diets or sometimes low carb ketogenic diets, and they say they don't even feel like they have diabetes anymore. They just feel different. Can you notice a difference in energy or how you felt as a high carb diabetic versus how you feel, you know, on this more low carb approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I said a bit in the beginning that yeah, it's also a thing that you see over and over with people that I saw that I helped them myself. That when they, but I will tell you about myself that I used to be high carber like the standard American diet, and I used to be half marathoner. And you know, it's this cliche like you know Dr. Noah that from South Africa that he had type 2 diabetes when he was a runner. So I also like I felt amazing and I was in a good shape, but in my running shape, but still, when I moved to the low carb diet, I felt way better than I used to be than I used to when I were a half marathoner, and only by changing the diet, and I haven't changed anything in my workouts or yeah. So and in the past I used to be like I used to be trapped in this blood glucose roller coaster that you always you eat a meal and then your blood glucose, you started maybe it will be 120, maybe 60, maybe 180. So from the beginning you feel bad. And after the meal, when you inject, so sometimes you can eat pasta and it will go up to, I don't know, 250, 300, and you get immediately tired and you can't walk, you can't function, you're not, yeah, you're not vital. And with the low carb, I started immediately when I started after 1 month, I started to wake up with way more energy. I could work. I was walking still today. I'm walking and I'm a student and I can do it for 12 hours a day without getting tired. And the next day I can do it again. And sometimes I eat, you know, one big meal a day of meat, sometimes maybe two. Yeah, it's extremely easy to manage, much more than the high carb that it got me stuck in many aspects in my life. And so, yeah, of course.
You said that you're studying nutrition. What are you learning in nutrition, and are you finding things that you disagree with when you're studying stuff?
Yeah, I really what I love about the studies. It's only the biological study. The real base of our human body. That's amazing. That's what you learned when you became a doctor, and what I'm learning now. That will be always true. Like what happens in gluconeogenesis, what happened in the cell, and all. So that's amazing. But in the other side, there is a lot of courses that suddenly they're preparing you to be a part of a part of the system. So, and then in those courses, so the lecturer she will say eat a lot of whole grains and a balanced diet with fruits and all. And I say to your patients in the future, like that's what you're gonna do in the office. And so it's like half of the courses I like, which is I can get connected, which is the real science, and half it's for me. I turn off my ears like it's too Western diet. Yeah.
Do you have any other, I mean, I guess students in the class with you that are think like you, or you know, adopting a low carb approach?
And no, not many. I would say 95% are in the mainstream, and I think many people in Israel. I don't know how is it in the US. They go to that profession because it's kind of like a psychologist. Like they love people, but they don't really. they are not into the science at all. Like they are very far from the science, and to know what really happens in the body and what will cure people, they are more like people like the so yeah, most of them not, unfortunately, I would say.
Have you noticed, I mean, what's been most surprising to you since you started this diet? So you said about 2.5 years. What made you want to do that in the first place?
Yeah, so as I said, in the high carb, you feel the diabetics. If you have diabetics in the group, they will know that you feel like you out of control, like your body, you can't control your body, and you're becoming a victim of the blood sugar. And whenever it's high, you're tired. Whenever it's low, you can't concentrate, and people think you're drunk. Like and uh, and with the standard American diet that I used to follow, which is not everyone does that. So I was all day long like that, and so you rarely get points that you are concentrated, and even when you are concentrated, it's too short, and it's between these extremes that you can't even feel concentrated because your body is tired anyway. Um, Sean? Yeah, can you hear me? We
Sorry,
lost Sean,
I
no?
said my Wi-Fi was interrupted. Sorry, I was asking about other folks in your class as being part of this high carb. You said most people are not, correct?
Yeah, true. Yeah, and you asked about the difference between the high carb and the low carb. Yeah, so I said like that I was extremely you can't function in the high carb diet, like it's you're just a victim of this, either you're too tired or you can't concentrate when you are on a low blood sugar, and when it's high you're too tired, you have to sleep, so you can sleep for 12 hours suddenly, yeah, and in the low carb it gets you back the control to your life, and I'm happy also that I see other people, when they do it, that's amazing. Like that's why in the first place I chose to become clinical nutritionist, like 2 years ago, when I was deep in all of that nutrition science. It was that before I was studying, but I was deep into the science, so it was amazing for me that what a huge impact can that change can have in your life. But still, people, you know it very well, they don't want to do it. Like my parents, and especially the older generation, they think it's crazy. Like they want to enjoy, they want to eat the cake every once in a while, to eat their bread, and they think it's insane. And also, but for me, it's easier. Like also, I can eat once a day. It's a huge advantage in my eyes than eating every 2 hours. It's like a prison.
Yeah, let me ask you, did you learn anything when you switched over? Because CGMs are a relatively new phenomenon. I mean, they've been around for several years, but I mean, not many people have had access to them until recently. What did the CGM teach you that you didn't already know?
Yeah, you're right. It gave me a lot. I think the 2 past years, it was yeah, it is a great question. It became much more common. And when I was growing up, so for example, I had no idea what was going on in the night. And the night is such a critical portion of the day. Like if you check the A1, if A1 for A1C, so you sleep for 8 hours, so it's 1/3 of the day. So it's a lot. It's like 1/3 of my A1C. That most of the nights I couldn't know what my values are. And in the dark days also, when I was young and eating high carb diet, so my parents they were waking up, and they had to check my blood sugar at 3 a.m. In the morning. And yeah, sometimes I had girlfriends that they were checking my blood, but it was terrible. Like and still it doesn't give you the full picture. So I think the huge advantage of the CGM is the night for diabetics, and also workouts, that you see exactly the point that the glycogen is being released, and you can see it exactly like in the same second, and then you can know for the next workout how to change, maybe to take glucose before, maybe not to inject 2 hours before. So that's a huge force.
Yeah, I mean, you don't find yourself do you find yourself giving yourself glucose prior to workouts if your blood glucose is low, or how do you manage that?
So if the blood glucose is too low, like I would say below 70, so I would correct, of course, with blood glucose. It would be dextrose. That's the most accurate, the fastest, and the most accurate. And but it's mostly for cardio. If I would, when I do the dumbbells a lot, and I do the barbell and squats, and so for these workouts, you don't need. Sometimes you might need to correct with insulin, like half a unit if it gets too intense. But then I would know it in advance, and usually I don't get to that point. I don't get to full muscle exertion. Like I don't like to work out I like to make a workout and to feel good. So I don't get to that point almost. So yeah, only glucose cardio, I think. But still, Sean, it's a lot of trial and error. Like I see many people that also cardio the blood glucose will go up, and the opposite. Like you see everything. Like it's very individual.
I'm aware of some people that how they approach hypoglycemia, and this is something that's a little bit controversial because we know that blood glucose typically goes up with intense exercise. So some people will start to see a little bit of a hypoglycemic episode beginning, and they'll combat that rather than feeding themselves glucose. They'll do a burst of really high intense exercise, and that will blunt that and turn it the other way. So instead of eating a bunch of extra food, because a lot of people, they become symptomatically hypoglycemic, and then they reactively eat, and then their blood glucose is 200, 250, and they overshoot. And so I've seen some people manage it with actual exercise, which is kind of an interesting thought. Have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, I can do it. I've done it in the past, not a lot of times, but I don't in my everyday. I will not do it, but I've done it just for the science. And yeah, you can do it I would say if you're around 70 and you want to bring the blood glucose to around 90, so you can do it. But I wouldn't count on that, because there's also a difference if you will start the workout at 70 and let's say 100. I think in 100 the rise would be much higher, because anyway you are a bit insulin resistant because of the blood glucose that's already in your body. So I think I wouldn't use it as a tool, but it's much better just insulin and glucose. It's very predictable when you get to that point that you eat very low carb and you see your physical amount of insulin. So it can get very predictable, and I think that's the key word in diabetes, generally type 1, type 2, that you need predictability when you work with insulin, and that's the hardest part with insulin. And with the standard American diet, there's zero predictability. What you asked before, like the opposite. Like it's a surprise every meal, and you're chasing it all the time with insulin.
Do you find that your symptoms for hypoglycemia, if they ever occur anymore, occur at a lower level? I mean, there's work from people in low carb communities were showing that people tolerate a little bit lower blood glucose. We've got people in this community that track their blood glucose. I'll talk to, Becky's in here right now. She routinely has had blood glucoses in the 40s and 50s, completely asymptomatic, and she eats a very much low carbohydrate, higher fat diet. Have you noticed better tolerance of lower numbers?
Yeah, of course. In the past, I could feel hypoglycemia also sometimes in 85 even, which is insane. When my blood glucose used to be much higher. Yeah, it definitely changed. The body adapts really well to these to the lows, and even you can also live in a 60. I saw that you shared some of that many times you check and you have 55, and that's what happens when you keep the body close to that line. So So if you fall down to 60 or for 2 hours, so it's minor, and I feel it on myself. Yeah, it's very adaptable feeling, and but it's important because when people do the Western diet, so that's also gets completely ruined. That mechanism, they can't know, and if you will feel hypoglycemia also if you fall from 150 to 100 really quick, like in 10 minutes, so you will feel the same symptoms. So it's very tricky. So when you get back to the 80, 70 blood glucose, so yeah, it gets much more smooth.
Let me ask you about meal timing. There's a diurnal pattern to our insulin sensitivity. Some people say we're more insulin sensitive towards later in the day, or it depends on what you read. But how do you time your meals? Do you find a difference if you eat late in the day versus early in the day? I know you said sometimes you eat one meal a day. How does that affect your insulin requirements or your glucose responses?
Yeah, that's an important point because the famous Dr. Bernstein, I think he brought that term that he called it the Dunn phenomena, and that's when evolutionary also for you and for non-diabetics and for diabetics, when you wake up you not much more, but you're a bit more insulin resistant, and I see it in my CGM. I can see it many times if I wake up at 7 a.m. and 1 hour later there was a slight rise to 100 or like that. So that's very important for your mealtime. I will not eat when I wake up because of that, because it can make a mess. And anyway, on that diet, on the low carb diet, you're not waking up hungry anyway, so it fits very perfectly well to the diet. So I would eat the first meal at noon, and that's the only rule in the morning. And the next important rule in diabetes, but I think for everyone, it's not to eat 5 hours before you go to bed. So less than 5 hours, it gives you a predictable night. And as we said, the night is the most important. It's one of the most important. It's 1/3 of your A1C, if you want to see it like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at nighttime, you obviously can't correct unless you're on a pump. I guess if you're on a pump, you can do that. But I mean, it's not like you can. I mean, some people might get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, check their blood glucose, and then dose accordingly. But I mean, generally, you're right. When you're asleep, you're kind of unaware of what your glucose is doing until you see it the next morning with your CGM. And so, what was the difference between? I mean, if you've tested, if you eat a late meal close to bedtime, what would happen overnight for you based on that with the CGMs and stuff like if you go out socially and you're out later and dinner's at 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. and you eat, what do you see any differences in the way your glucose is and that overnight or the next morning?
Yeah, absolutely. When it's also it depends a lot on what you eat, what is the food content, but everything that like protein, if you eat fish, meat, egg, whatever your protein, where your protein comes from. So before bed it will look nice, but then many times in the night, like if I had 2 hours before I went to bed, so during the night there is slight rises, and then it will stay there until the morning. That's what you see, and it's very like it's you shouldn't get there because anyway your body is by the circadian rhythm and all. So anyway, you shouldn't really digest in the night. So that's biologically for every person on this earth. So but yeah, of course there was a difference, and back in the days I could eat also in the middle of the night, and it's a mess. And many times you would see also a rise in the morning after. And you already forgot what you ate in last night, but you will see the rise very well to 150, plus the Dunn phenomena that Dr. Bernstein was saying. So you add to that some protein that haven't digested fully. Like in the morning, suddenly you will see it. So no, not a good idea.
Yeah, and some people are talking about sleep quality. Do you find that, if you have a good night's sleep, your glucose numbers look better versus a poor night's sleep?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. When you sleep less, so it's way harder to control the blood glucose. That's what I saw for me. I knew it also when I wasn't a low carber. You see it, the body. I would say is getting more insulin resistant usually, and it's very hard to predict that also. So yeah, well, good night's sleep is yeah, that's the body. I think that's the base.
And I've read Bernstein's book, and I've also read Mastering Diabetes. I just over the years I've read quite a bit of stuff. But one of the things he also talks about is a change in uh, response, blood glucose response to exercise, depending on the time of day as well. Have you found that exercising in the afternoon is better or worse, or the morning, or when do you find exercise to be better for you?
Yeah, definitely there is a difference. Yeah, the book, it's a good book. I read it also. It's a long book, but a good one. Yeah, but in the morning, it adds to the insulin resistance that you experience when you wake up. So usually you will see a rise unless you injected before. If you are not on any injection, so yeah, I would see a rise. I would prefer for predictability, I would prefer the after, like in the evening. I think it's the best. It's way more predictable, but also in the morning I've done it a lot. The only important thing is not to eat before, not to inject, and then you might have a slight rise. You might inject like half a unit. Also, Dr. Bernstein, that's what he recommends, and it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could see where a pattern would emerge. Like I said, you wake up in the morning, you've got this dawn phenomenon, this gradual rise in blood glucose, you've got perhaps more insulin resistance. That might be a time for some low intense cardio, which predictably will bring down the glucose, and then saving the more intense stuff for later in the day when you tend to be more perhaps insulin sensitive. And that's something that I've discovered myself just playing with that stuff, that if I do what I used to do was really high intense exercise early in the morning when I first got up, and I would see a rise in blood glucose due to that. And because I wasn't cooling down, and I wasn't doing I was just doing the really heavy exertion stuff, the sprinting, without any type of cool down. And since I've changed that over the years, I've seen a concomitant very different approach to the way my blood glucose. My blood glucose was almost, the fact that I'm eating just meat all the time, it was mostly dependent upon exercise for me, intensity of exercise. And, diet had a little bit of role, but again, if I was eating a whole bunch of protein, I would have a little bit more of a rise, but diet still had a much bigger impact, or sorry, exercise had a much bigger impact on me, and the timing of that, and the intensity, and if I did cool downs and stuff like that. So that's something I've discovered. And I think that probably translates into folks with diabetes as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Tomer, we've almost gone through an hour. I've got to do some consultations here. It's been a real pleasure meeting you and learning about this. And I'm sure some of the diabetics out there listening have benefited from this, particularly the type 1s. I think a low carbohydrate diet is de facto the best diet for diabetes. I mean, without a doubt. And, I would even argue a carnivore diet may even be perhaps even the best one, but that's debatable. But anyway, thanks for doing what you're doing, and I wish you luck with your studies. And I think it's the more and more people that express this and share their story, the more people are going to be helped. And thanks for what you're doing. Appreciate it. Where do people go to find out? Do you have some social media or a way that people can maybe ask more questions of you or follow you or something like that?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and I have a website, tomerpappe.com, and Facebook. Yeah, Ancestral Living on Facebook, and on Instagram the same, and that's what I do, Ancestral, and I believe in it, and yeah, it's very good. I'm the same as you. Sometimes I will be full carnivore. It's amazing for diabetics, and sometimes I will add some carbs. But yeah, I agree with you that that's the answer for diabetes. That's what we have today, and I'm happy to be here, and thank you also for doing what you're doing. I see a lot of stuff now with the pandemic, and also thanks.
Yeah, well, thanks for sharing the details. I mean, I know some of it, it's good to hear, the actual numbers and stuff like that, because that'll help a lot of people. Okay, guys, everybody, great. Thanks. I'll see everybody tomorrow. You guys have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye now. Take care, everybody.